The woman finally escaped the doomsday silo, but she found the outside world to be desolate. The ground was covered with corpses. The toxins in the air could kill all living beings. She gradually disappeared from the sight of the silo residents. No one knew where the woman had gone. The uninformed residents clamored to go outside.
Go outside, come on! Bring me the rat!
After an unknown amount of time, the missing woman suddenly reappeared. She brought back a terrifying message. The real danger was hidden within the silo. A year later, Season 2 of Wool has finally launched. Before the story begins, let's briefly review the background setting of this series. In a distant dystopian future, around 10,000 humans live in a 144-layered deep silo. They have been told that the outside world has become uninhabitable due to gas contamination. Only by staying in the bunker can they survive safely. The survivors have a strict hierarchy and have established rules to maintain order. Those who severely violate the rules are exiled outside the bunker and die immediately from gas contamination. The bunker broadcasts their death process to warn everyone. Thus, anything related to going out has become a deadly taboo. Engineer Juliet, due to the death of her boyfriend George, has been investigating the secrets hidden in the bunker. When she finally stepped out of this cage, Juliet found the landscape barren before her. The ground was littered with rings similar to those in the silo. She also realized that the people who had died before were because the tape on their protective suits had been tampered with. That's why they died as soon as they left the bunker. We will supplement the remaining details as we go along. At the beginning of Season 2, a boy named Tim helped the engineering department by passing a note to his father from the badge on his father's uniform. This person should be a bunker sheriff. The note said that the generator would flood in 15 minutes. The crowd was waiting for instructions. The sheriff ordered someone to take his son away. Then he ordered his men to ring the bell 5 times. The guards at the bunker exit heightened their alertness because the bell signified the start of battle. The sheriff quickly led his supporters to attack. The gatekeeper initially defended, using the advantage of the broken bridge. But the sheriff's men surprisingly found a metal gate to place over the broken bridge. He shouted to capture Russell alive, and then charged toward the gatekeeper with his men. The gatekeeper took cover and concentrated fire. The sheriff successfully advanced using human shields. The riot lasted until late into the night. They finally breached the bunker door.
Do you think Russell was lying?
I don't know.
Well, there's one way to find out.
It seemed that a person named Russell told them that the outside world was safe. Now the generator was about to fail. No matter what they did, they would die. The sheriff thought it was better to fight to the death. They shouted freedom as they charged into the outside world. They raised the green flag in their hands. Now this tattered flag was planted in the ground. Juliet cautiously walked forward and saw the long dried corpses. They still clutched the flagpole in their hands. She climbed up the dirt slope ahead. Her eyes were filled with corpses of bones, which was very shocking. At the end of the pile of bodies was a bunker exit. It seemed that none of the group of people who crawled out back then survived, and all died from the gas. Juliet carefully stepped over the corpses as she advanced. Then she jumped into the gap of the bunker door. The stairs were covered with skeletons. There seemed to be no end in sight. The door at the end was also blocked by corpses. Juliet moved them aside. Then she picked up a lamp from the ground and turned it on. Juliet crawled through the door and began to feel around. She fished out a crowbar from the pile of corpses. Juliet intended to pry open the second door, but she found she didn't have enough strength. Juliet calmed down and examined the door structure. Then she inserted the crowbar into the gap at the top. Juliet stepped on the wall for leverage and used her weight to pry the door open. She picked up the lamp and continued to move inside. As she closed the door, the tape on her wrist got torn. This meant that the gas could seep into her protective suit. Juliet hurriedly ran deeper into the bunker. Perhaps the air inside hadn't been contaminated yet. As she passed the cafeteria, she grabbed a few cups and a flashlight. However, halfway through, she began to struggle to breathe. Juliet couldn't take off her helmet and was very anxious. She took the crowbar and smashed the glass of the helmet. Juliet gasped for air. Fortunately, the air here was indeed unpolluted. Juliet poured the water from the cups onto her protective suit. Then she cut a few slits to take it off. Juliet held the flashlight and surveyed the bunker. Its structure was similar to the previous Silo 18. At this moment, Juliet noticed a mirror on the wall. The previous Silo leaders had monitored everything through cameras. She smashed the mirror and found a strange device inside. Juliet rummaged through a closet and pulled out a work uniform to put on. Since she was an engineer, she naturally had to check out the mechanical department. The familiar environment filled Juliet with emotion, as if she had traveled back in time to the day she first joined the mechanical department. At first, she could only help with waste collection, throwing useless items into the pipeline for disposal, then filtering out valuable items to send to the recycling department. Juliet snapped back to reality from her memories. Suddenly, she saw a faint light below. Juliet hurried over to take a look. It turned out there was a crop growing area there, but most of it had already withered. In the illuminated area, there was a broken sprinkler that was dripping water outside. Juliet took out a water bottle to quench her thirst. The temperature in the lower mechanical department was very high. Her former colleague Gladys often reminded them to keep drinking water until their urine was clear. The work at the recycling station was monotonous. Juliet often picked up broken toys to repair. When her mentor found out, he advised her not to waste her time. Since she liked repairing things, she should fix something useful. Ever since her mother committed suicide, Juliet had shut herself off. Her peers avoided her as well. It was her mentor and the partners in the mechanical department who changed everything. They helped Juliet step out of the shadows and embrace a new life. But now, everyone was gone. She was exploring the bunker all alone. Juliet found traces of the recent brawl. The bridge in the middle was broken and impassable. As Juliet was feeling distressed, she noticed several soldiers hanging upside down from the ladder above. Juliet pulled them up with all her strength. Then she cut the rope around the corpse's feet and tied a knot in the rope to secure it. Then she tied it to the railing. Juliet grabbed the rope and began to climb down. This method was feasible but very dangerous. One misstep could result in a fatal fall. Juliet swung her body to try to gain momentum on the rope. Fortunately, there was water below. Otherwise, the protagonist would have died. It seemed that the note received by the sheriff was indeed accurate. The lower part of the silo was indeed flooded. Juliet was still tangled in the rope and almost drowned in this pool. If she hadn't grabbed onto an empty barrel nearby, she might have truly died here today. Juliet swam to the nearby pillar, grabbed the rope, and climbed up the stairs. Juliet felt a bit overwhelmed. She couldn't help but lie down and scream. After Juliet calmed down, she hurried to tend to her wounds and wrapped the scrape on her wrist. Juliet gazed at the broken bridge. She couldn't help but think of the day her friend Sherry took her on an adventure. The two had ignored the ban and ventured into the lowest part of the silo. The walls were engraved with words left behind before the rebellion. The atmosphere was somewhat eerie. Sherry talked about her adventure here with Knox and her friends before. She had accidentally fallen asleep on the side. Those unreliable ones actually forgot about Sherry. They didn't wake her and just left, turning off the lights. When Sherry woke up, she found herself in complete darkness, alone. Fortunately, she slowly felt her way forward and quickly found the exit. Juliet's situation now was just like Sherry's back then. Despite being lonely and in the dark, staying in one place would only lead to death. She had to keep feeling her way forward until she found a way to survive. Juliet gathered her spirits and overturned a metal rack. Then she dragged usable parts to the edge of the broken bridge. Using the limited tools at her disposal, Juliet assembled a makeshift iron bridge. She reinforced the joints with plastic sheeting. Juliet fashioned a pulley hoist with rope to place the iron bridge over the broken section. With a loud crash, the iron frame fell into place. A simple bridge was completed. However, whether this thing could support an adult's weight was still unknown. Juliet tied a rope around her waist to prevent falling back into the water pit. She took a deep breath and slowly stepped onto it. The iron frame creaked under the strain. There were already bends appearing in the middle. Juliet cautiously moved forward. Suddenly, the bridge began to collapse downward. She jumped to the other side and grabbed the stone wall. However, the safety rope was too short. Juliet took out her dagger to cut the rope. She successfully climbed onto the broken bridge and sat down for a moment to catch her breath. Her racing heartbeat gradually calmed down. Juliet explored the room on this side. A fan was oscillating on the table. The hanging tag on it made a sound. Juliet felt a bit desperate. She came to investigate only after hearing this sound. Since things had come to this, she might as well explore the surroundings. Just then, a few large metal barrels caught her eye. There was also a metal door panel stacked against the wall. Juliet arranged the barrels and then laid them down. Then she lifted the metal plate upwards and pressed sandbags on one side. Juliet used the barrels as rollers to push the metal plate to the broken bridge. The plate slid out on the rollers. It perfectly spanned the two sections of the broken bridge. Now Juliet could move freely. Just as she was about to leave, she heard a sound of music. Juliet curiously followed the sound to check. She gripped the crowbar tightly in her hand. After passing through the corpses, Juliet found a door, but it was a keypad door that couldn't be opened by brute force. Just as Juliet was about to leave, a stranger appeared behind the door.
I get it. You know, you see a closed door, what's on the other side? Thing is, you do that again, and I'm gonna kill you.
Mayor Bernard saw the gruesome scene at the entrance of the abandoned silo. Through the lens of Juliet's protective suit, he opened the emergency manual. It stated that if the cleaning mission failed, they should prepare for the onset of war. Just then, the alarm suddenly went off. Bernard closed the blast door and left. Meanwhile, Minister Aim was also awakened by the alarm. The soldier outside the door informed her that Juliet had not followed the regulations to clean the sensors on the ground. This was the first cleaning mission failure since the silo's establishment. Moreover, Juliet had not been killed by the gas. This incident overturned everyone's understanding.
She walked over the hill. That means it's safe. I want to go out too.
Unease and suspicion were bound to incite a rebellion. Some people had called for power outages and the closure of silos, demanding an explanation from those above. Just then, Walker arrived with a water gun. This calmed the residents down. However, the silo was now a powder keg and could explode at any moment. On the other side, Bernard was formulating a strategy. He first announced an emergency curfew at 8 p.m. Then he sent his subordinate David to the lower level to detain the manager responsible for keeping the tape, Mike, as well as Juliet's teacher, Walker. The police quickly found Walker in the lower level and asked her to go to the Department of Justice. Knox, the foreman of the mechanical department, was worried that war might erupt in the silo, so he advised his friend in charge of forging not to agree if someone came to you to make weapons. As for the second request, the director hadn't mentioned it for now. Bernard approached Aim and hoped the Department of Justice could back him up. At least it could show unity and reassure the public. Aim countered, asking why Juliet hadn't been killed by the gas. Bernard admitted that someone had discovered the secret of the tape. They had replaced the inferior tape with insulation tape, so the gas didn't leak into the protective suits. But that wasn't the main point. Bernard told Aim that he saw the body in the neighboring silo. Through the lens, the residents there had erupted into a civil war, and we were about to repeat that fate. Bernard couldn't take his subordinates lightly, so he needed Aim's assistance. However, he was met with a refusal. Aim was fed up with life in the silo. Unless Bernard has a way to grant her freedom, she doesn't want her life disturbed. At the same time, Walker was locked up in the detention center. Mike sat beside her. Both knew that the issue with the tape had been exposed. Upon learning that Walker had been taken, Sherry also suspected the same. Moreover, she realized that the Department of Justice was well aware that the tape on protective clothing was useless. They intentionally wanted to kill the person who went out to clean.
Why would people believe Walker instead of Judicial?
Because they just saw Juliet walk over the hill.
At this moment, Walker and Mike were discussing how to respond to the Department of Justice's strategies. Walker believed that the DOJ had no evidence, and they just needed to deny everything. Mike thought her idea was too naive. The DOJ could easily find a witness to condemn them, and simply send them away to the mines. The only way to turn the tables on them was for Mike to reveal the truth about the tape. Soon after, Bernard gathered the residents of the silo to begin his speech. His approach was very clever. Bernard first declared that today marked the dawn of a new era, because as far back as we can remember, every person sent out to clean has died on that hillside. Yet Juliet had safely crossed over the hillside.
She's alive!
No, I wish that were true.
Bernard explained that although Juliet had crossed the hillside, she was now dead. However, she remained our hero, because Juliet sacrificed herself to test a newly developed tape for the silo. This tape had better sealing properties, which allowed her to cross the hillside safely.
We will keep finding ways to make our suits better and stronger to our ultimate goal of safely leaving the silo!
Bernard covered up the truth with a clever mouth. Minister Aim also stood up to echo his words, and announced that, in celebration of the new tape's birth, each household would receive an additional 5 credit points. Sherry watched as everyone was incited, and immediately stood up to explain that the mayor was lying, but the law enforcement officers immediately arrested her. Fortunately, Knox and Officer Hank stepped forward to explain that Sherry was Juliet's friend, and that she was just upset and speaking nonsense. She was an important talent in the mechanical department, and we should be a bit more forgiving. The law enforcement finally relented. After the speech ended, David slipped some money to a few extras. Who were the ones shouting at the mayor earlier? They were like helpers planted by magicians in the audience. Bernard knew that a single speech alone couldn't suppress the dissenters, so he instructed David to stay vigilant. Next, he decided to release Walker and Mike. After all, the tape issue had been resolved, and there was no need to keep them locked up. With the matter resolved, David felt frustrated. Both he and Aim were Bernard's apprentices, but he had never been given significant responsibilities. Now that Aim's relationship with Bernard had improved, his sense of presence felt even weaker. David was curious about the connection between the two. Bernard went to thank Aim for speaking on his behalf during the speech. However, this tactic could only temporarily stabilize everyone. Bernard needed Aim's cooperation. The latter reiterated her demand, "Give me my freedom."
So I want what Juliet Nichols had today. I want to go out.
At the same time, Sherry gathered those who believed in her and were determined to find the truth. Meanwhile, on Juliet's side, a mysterious man asked her where she was from. Juliet could only say the neighboring silo. To her surprise, the mysterious man retorted, "There are 50 silos here. Which one do you mean by neighboring?" Juliet was taken aback by this. It was her first time encountering such information. The mysterious man introduced himself as Sorrow. He was the only survivor of Silo 17. Previously, there was a man named Tucker here, who, like Juliet, was sent for ground cleaning. However, after Tucker went out, he also failed to clean the sensors. Instead, he wrote lies on the window. This led to a public uprising and escape from the silo. A man named Russell advised Sorrow to hide here and not go out. This Russell was the person repeatedly mentioned by the sheriff of Silo 17. He was the head of the IT department, and also Sorrow's mentor.
And Russell told me, don't, no matter what, never let anyone in the vault ever.
Juliet panicked upon hearing this. She hadn't cleaned the sensors after she ran out. Would the people in that silo want to escape too? Would they die in the gas like those in Silo 17? Juliet had to return to stop them. At this moment, in Silo 18, a mechanical department employee named Teddy was arrested for graffiti on his dormitory wall that read "Juliet is not dead." Thus, Teddy was treated as a heretic by the police. On the other side, Bernard took Aim into the basement. She reminded him that during the next arrest of graffiti artists, it was best to ensure they were from the upper or middle levels, and not to constantly target the mechanical department, or it would lead to backlash. In addition, Aim was curious if Juliet could survive in Silo 17. Bernard immediately denied this. That silo had been extinct for many years. No one could survive there. Then Bernard went to see David and asked how those who had seen the hard drive were doing. David replied that they had already been sedated. Only 2 people who helped Juliet find the hard drive were left, and they were still in the isolation room. At the Department of Justice, the 2 were Patrick and Danny Bly. David quickly arrived at Patrick's isolation room and removed the hood from Patrick's head.
I know it's all a fucking lie. So how about we skip ahead to the part where you stick a knife in my eye?
David stated that they weren't that brutal. Not everyone who knows the truth has to die. The Department of Justice has a drug that can erase people's memories. A small dose can make someone forget the past few weeks, while a large dose can erase decades of memories. Patrick pleaded with David to give him the largest dosage. He wanted to forget the death of his wife. David told Patrick not to rush. Before that, you need to help us with something. At a critical moment, the director held back information again. Meanwhile, Juliet was figuring out how to return. She repaired an abandoned lamppost, which illuminated the graffiti on the wall that read, "Tucker is not dead." The situations in the 2 silos were remarkably similar. As Juliet passed by the bunker, she saw a metal box on the ground. Sorrow urged her to open it and take a look. Juliet opened it and found chicken soup inside. She immediately picked it up and drank it all. Sorrow asked, "Did you find the protective suit?" Actually, it was obvious without asking. In such an abandoned silo for many years, usable materials were very scarce, let alone the specially made protective suits. Sorrow remembered that the protective suits were assembled in the S-room, with raw materials sourced from the items supply department, but those levels had all been flooded. He couldn't help but ask Juliet, "Why didn't you clean the sensors after leaving the silo?" Juliet explained, "Because I saw the truth. The reason why others choose to clean was because they saw blue sky and white clouds after going out, so they couldn't wait to wipe the camera and let everyone see the outside world." However, Juliet discovered that it was merely a holographic image in the helmet. That's why she gave up on cleaning. But Juliet had never considered that her actions might lead to a civil war in the silo. Now it was her turn to ask Sorrow questions. The bodies in the outer hall had not been dead as long as the others. Juliet wanted to know what had happened to them. Sorrow pulled up a partition and refused to talk. Juliet received no response. She could only thank him for the chicken soup he gave her. Hearing this, Sorrow told Juliet not to get the wrong idea. I gave you food to watch you eat it, to prove that you are a real person, and not something I imagined. Sorrow had been locked up alone for so long that he was already experiencing mental problems. At night, Juliet finally fell asleep, only to be awakened by the sound of music. Sorrow said he had come up with an idea. Those firefighters had helmets and wore protective suits, and they had oxygen tanks to enter the flames. Why not look for a firefighter suit and give it a try? Juliet thought this was worth a try, although the firefighter suit wouldn't protect her from surviving in the toxic gas outside. It could help her walk back to the original silo. Sorrow said that firefighter suits were generally kept in 3 places: the engineering department, the 70th floor, and next to the recycling department on the 23rd floor. Juliet decided to check the 23rd floor first. In Silo 18, David had been ordered to recall all retired stormtroopers to respond to emergency situations. One of them, a sharpshooter named Reggie, was assigned to the mechanical department on the lower level, causing rising resentment within the mechanical department. In the evening, Sherry led everyone to the detention center to demand the release of Teddy. Knox and Hank assisted the police in blocking Sherry. However, the emotions of the protesting crowd were running high, and the situation was about to spiral out of control. Patrick appeared. He lit the Molotov cocktails as instructed by David and threw it over, shouting, "Give Teddy his freedom." A person with braided hair tackled Patrick and was shot dead by the police on the spot. The crowd scattered like startled birds. Knox and Sherry hurried over to check on the person with the braids, but sadly, the person had already passed away. The gap between the mechanical department and the upper levels was widening. The current sheriff, who was still unaware of the situation, was writing a report about Juliet's cleaning mission. He had interviewed 5 assault team members, who arrested Juliet at the time. 4 of them said she volunteered for the cleaning mission, while 1 team member claimed he was focused on his work and didn't hear anything. The sheriff handed the report to AIM and explained that before Juliet went to the surface, he had spoken to her face to face. She never mentioned wanting to go to the surface. Therefore, the sheriff suspected that Juliet wasn't acting voluntarily. AIM ordered him to stop investigating further, and that she would handle the rest. Shortly after, the sheriff learned about the recent tragedy, in which a mechanical department employee was killed trying to stop the riot. This situation was indeed tricky. At this moment, Knox and Sherry met in a place not covered by surveillance. He understood her desire for the truth, but they couldn't continue in Sherry's way. During their conversation, Knox mentioned, "Do you remember how we used to explore down below, when we were kids? Do you remember that wall of names?"
We didn't know what it meant then. Now I think I do.
Knox seemed to have discovered something. On the other side, Bernard promised AIM that when she was ready to go to the surface, he would shut down the restaurant's display screen and the sheriff's office camera. For regular maintenance reasons, you must cross the hill within 5 minutes. As soon as the time is up, I will restart the displays. Then Bernard took out a measuring tape and planned to personally help AIM tailor a set of protective clothing. AIM countered Bernard, "Do you really think I can help you? I previously asked you to release the mechanical department graffiti artist, and you didn't do it. That's why incidents like the Molotov cocktail happened." AIM believed that Bernard was still intentionally inciting hatred against the mechanical department, according to the instructions in the Silo manual. This way, he would have an excuse to suppress the rebellion. Bernard had to explain that he wasn't the one who set the fire.
I wouldn't lie to you.
And yet you already have.
How?
Juliet Nichols did not ask to go out, did she?
This time, Bernard didn't deny it. While the entire silo was in unrest, Juliet's father Peter met a woman named Phoebe. She was about to participate in the fertility lottery, so Phoebe was too anxious to sleep. Due to the limited resources in the silo, everyone had a contraceptive device inside them. Only those selected in the lottery could have it removed. To comfort her, Peter volunteered to tell the story of Juliet's birth. Then he wished Phoebe good luck in being chosen. To his surprise, she was indeed favored by Lady Luck. Peter quickly saw Phoebe's surgery appointment on the computer, but it was followed by an orange level alert. It was specifically noted that the patient must not have the contraceptive device removed, but she must be made to believe that it had been removed. Soon after, the surgery began. Peter watched the excited couple. In the end, he broke the rules and helped them remove the contraceptive device. Meanwhile, Juliet discovered that her path was blocked by water, so Juliet had to seek help from Sorrow. she planned to dive to the next floor, where she could cross the apartment and enter the hallway. However, before that, she needed to create a device to deliver oxygen underwater. Then she would ask Sorrow to operate the device on the shore. Juliet explained for a long time through the door panel, but Sorrow said he couldn't go out. She could only keep pleading with him. That's the lives of 10,000 people. Juliet had to return to stop the disaster from happening. She knew Sorrow understood the feeling of losing everyone, so she hoped he could empathize with her feelings. As Juliet was in distress, she suddenly noticed a line written on the door behind her. "We will get in sooner or later," from the bodies in the outer hall. The person who wrote the words couldn't convince Sorrow to open the door. Juliet couldn't become the next corpse, so she decided to seek another method. To her surprise, Sorrow chased after her.
Do I look bad?
No. I thought maybe you'd look different.
Juliet used the knowledge she learned from the mechanical department to create a diving device using available materials, and Sorrow hadn't seen a living person for a long time, continuing to chatter in her ear, and brought up a book he had read before, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. In the book, people could explore the ocean floor, using breathing devices and submarines. Juliet was feeling annoyed at the moment, so she begged him to stop rambling. Hearing this, Sorrow took Juliet to a certain room, where there was a blackboard that could be used to draw design plans. Juliet picked up some chalk to perform calculations. Sorrow looked around and saw several backpacks. He recognized one of them as belonging to his desk partner from school. Juliet couldn't help but interrupt Sorrow, saying, "This is a level B classroom." The owner of the backpack was around 11 years old when the rebellion happened. "How could you have been in class with her? How long have you been locked up?" Sorrow didn't answer Juliet's questions, but ran over to play the organ instead.
Yeah, but how do you think I'm playing the music?
I don't care.
I'm trying to show you something.
It turned out that the instrument had a bellows inside that could pump air into the air valve. Juliet could use it to send air into the pipes. She immediately took apart the bellows and created a simple air pumping device. Suddenly, Sorrow requested to return to the basement, saying he seemed to have forgotten to lock the door. Juliet thought he was being overly sensitive. She quickly said, "I saw you lock the door." Upon hearing this, Sorrow finally quieted down. Meanwhile, in Silo 18, Knox brought Sherry to the Wall of Names, in the underground forbidden area. When he was young, he thought these were the names of the founders. Now he realized that the names on it might belong to mechanical department personnel who died in the rebellion. This meant that rebellions had occurred in every generation. The reasons for the rebellions varied. Sometimes it was due to food shortages on the farms, and sometimes it was because factory workers went on strike. However, regardless of where the rebellion started, the mechanical department was always punished in the end.
Why is that?
Because we can shut this fucker down.
Of course, the two of them didn't know that the mayor's manual explicitly stated that in the event of any uprising, the blame must be directed at the mechanical department. Knox, as the head of the mechanical department, wanted to use this to blackmail the mayor into sending someone to investigate the truth outside the silo. Sherry believed the mayor was untrustworthy and suggested they should discuss it with Judge Aim. After Bernard learned of the mechanical department's demands, he immediately went to stop Aim because her actions were contrary to the manual. Aim ignored Bernard's warning and urged him to quickly produce the cleaning protective suit. "Only after you finish the protective suit can you make requests to me?" Bernard tolerated Aim's behavior, which made David even more unhappy. He decided to stop Aim from meeting with the mechanical department. The known charter specified 3 grounds for impeaching a judge: confirmed misconduct, incapacity, and endangerment to the silo. As long as David could rally other departments to impeach Aim, the meeting could be cancelled. His wife thought it wasn't necessary to complicate things this way. Just use impeachment as a threat to send a signal to Bernard. Only he could get Aim imprisoned. David planned to put pressure on Bernard first, so he organized a protest to impeach Aim. Aim thought this was the doing of Bernard. However, he insisted that he was unaware of it. Aim softened her tone upon hearing this, and stated, "I have no intention of allowing those people to explore outside the silo." Originally, Aim just wanted to agree temporarily, and then form a committee to pretend to study Knox's proposal, and then dismiss it through bureaucratic procedures. As for the impeachment of Aim, she didn't care at all. Perhaps she had already left the silo before the impeachment was realized. After hearing this, Bernard finally felt relieved. He used the excuse of trying on the protective suit to invite Aim over for dinner at 7 p.m. After all, the mechanical department's meeting was at 9 p.m. AIM agreed without hesitation. Meanwhile, the sheriff was investigating the previous Molotov cocktail riot in the silo. He went to the police station to check on the body of the person with the braids. However, he unexpectedly learned that the corpse had been taken away by the Justice Department. The sheriff was even more convinced that this riot must be related to someone in the Justice Department. In Silo 17, Juliet had already made the breathing device. Sorrow stayed on the shore, continuously pumping air. Juliet secured the hemp rope and jumped into the water holding the iron block. She relied on the weight of the iron block to move forward. Unexpectedly, the length of the breathing tube was insufficient. Juliet took a deep breath and let go of the tube. She prepared to take the risk and search ahead. The iron block got stuck in a crevice. Juliet couldn't break free. She could only grab onto the iron pipe in front of her. However, the pipe was severely corroded and soon broke. Fortunately, she untied the hemp rope on her body in time and climbed onto the water surface. Juliet found the location that Sorrow mentioned and smashed open a cabinet to retrieve the fire suit. Meanwhile, Sorrow seemed anxious for some reason. As soon as Juliet surfaced, he ran back to the basement. When he saw that the main door was indeed locked, Sorrow finally sighed in relief. He was about to unlock the keypad to enter when he discovered the password was incorrect. Sorrow couldn't believe it and tried again, but this time, it was still wrong. If he tried once more and still couldn't open it, the basement door would be permanently sealed. Sorrow forced himself to calm down and continued to input a series of numbers. Fortunately, this time he opened the basement. It was already 7 p.m. Bernard personally cooked dinner to host AIM. AIM hurriedly finished her meal and wanted to try on the protective suit, but Bernard remained seated and didn't move. He wouldn't allow anyone to disobey the manual, so he poisoned AIM's meal. At this point, AIM had only one question: where is the hard drive that Juliet took? Bernard admitted that it had been destroyed. He keenly noticed that there were unknown stories hidden behind the hard drive. AIM must have discovered something.
All I can say is that it had something to do with Salvador Quinn, 140 years ago when he was head of IT.
During the rebellion.
Yes, he wrote a letter. Part of it was in code.
What did it say?
I can't tell you, Bernard.
Before her death, AIM requested to visit the restaurant once more, to take a last look at the outside world. Bernard couldn't take the risk of bringing her outside, so he put a VR headset on AIM. It contained beautiful scenery from the 2018 Forest Reserve. AIM died in the illusion, never to have the chance to leave the silo again. Afterwards, Bernard called David to clean up the scene. Meanwhile, Knox, who was unaware of the current situation, led the mechanical department members to speak with AIM, but what greeted them was a group of residents. These people wanted to prevent the lower levels from interfering with the upper levels. Fortunately, the supply department head Mike was prepared. She threw a signal ball down to the lower levels. The lower level staff cut off the power to the silo. This made the residents too afraid to cause trouble. Bernard also came out to ease the tension and promised that as soon as the power was restored, he would take them to see AIM. Upon hearing this, Mike threw another ball down. The silo's lighting was quickly restored. Bernard kept his promise and led them to the Justice Department. However, at this moment, AIM had a dagger lodged in her chest and was slumped in the chair behind her desk. It seemed that Bernard wanted to place AIM's death directly on the mechanical department's shoulders. Sherry realized that the situation was wrong. She stopped Knox and led him away. Bernard warned David, "I know you are behind the impeachment matter. As long as you handle AIM's death properly, I can overlook this matter." David understood and went outside to announce that the mechanical department was responsible for AIM's death.
It is now the duty of every citizen to find those murderers and bring them to justice.
Now David had schemed to force Bernard to deal with AIM, and successfully replaced her as a judge. They incited the residents to resist the mechanical department, and set high bounties to capture the murderer. Knox and the others wanted to return to the lower levels, and hoped to use the dockworkers' elevator. Although the use of that machinery was prohibited in the silo, the dockworkers had been secretly using the elevator to transport goods quickly. Of course, there's no such thing as a free lunch.
Give anything that belonged to Juliet Nichols.
Walker had to give the dockworker what he wanted, to save people. After the dockworker received his benefits, he betrayed them. Fortunately, Knox discovered this in time, and relocated before the Justice Department could act. The more people there were, the bigger the target became. Knox instructed Walker and Mike to leave first, After all, they weren't after any bounty. They were relatively safer that way. He and Sherry would act according to the situation, to find a way back to the lower levels. After the two groups parted ways, Mike again urged Walker to go ahead. Having lived in the lower level workshop for 25 years, the residents above the 125th floor didn't even recognize Walker. But Mike was the head of the supply department, and if Walker followed her, he would be at risk of exposure. As soon as the two parted, the Justice Department found Mike. In addition, Knox and Sherry's whereabouts were also under their surveillance. The plainclothes assault team was ambushing at the lower level. To continue stirring up the emotions of the crowd, Bernard saw that all the arrangements were in place, and called in Kyle, one of Juliet's allies from the last season. This person is skilled in computer technology. However, he was sentenced to 5 years in the mines by AIM for helping Juliet crack the hard drive. Bernard was willing to give him a chance for redemption. As long as Kyle could repair the hard drive, he could escape the mines and regain his freedom. It is known that those who go down to the mines have at most a 5-year lifespan. The chances of Kyle surviving underground were very slim, so he agreed to Bernard's terms, and found a key map from the hard drive. It showed that the walls of the IT department and the Justice Bureau were connected to some lines that didn't belong to the silo. These lines were buried deep outside the walls. At the very bottom of the silo, there was also a hidden tunnel, whose destination was unknown. In addition to these two important clues, Kyle also found a letter from the former head of the IT department to his wife. Why would such a thing exist on the hard drive? Kyle suspected that there might be a hidden code within it. Bernard immediately recalled Aim's last words. There must be important information in this letter. In Silo 17, Juliet had found the fire suit, but she hadn't come across the fire helmet. Juliet didn't want to risk going into the water anymore, so she wanted to see if the old helmet could connect to the trachea. Sorrow remembered the password and came out to move around. Juliet asked him, "Your generator is 100 levels underwater. How come there are still lights here?" Sorrow explained that the IT department had its own power source from outside the silo. He wasn't sure about the specifics. It seemed that the lines Kyle and Bernard found on the hard drive map were likely the external power supply for the IT department. Sorrow continued. During the riot, some of the Justice Department's strike team members blew up the underground water pump on the 144th floor in an attempt to drown the mechanical department. They didn't have time to repair the pump, and the flood submerged the generator. So until now, the water level has been rising. It is estimated that in 10 months, the water will reach the IT department. Sorrow asked Juliet, "Is there any way to stop the water level from rising?" Juliet replied that the nearest underground water pump was on the 30th floor. If they could find it and restore power, maybe they could prevent the water level from continuing to rise. Upon hearing this, Sorrow hoped Juliet would help, but she was busy fixing the helmet to return to Silo 18. She didn't want to waste time dealing with these issues. Hearing this, Sorrow had to give up. He continued to stick close to Juliet, and confessed that his real name was Cole Myers.
I went to an event, and they asked me, "Who are you with?" And I said, "I'm Solo."
They misheard Solo as Sorrow, so from then on, everyone called him Sorrow. Juliet suddenly felt dizzy upon hearing this. Sorrow thought she might be too hungry, so he ran off to get some food. Juliet headed to the storage room to look for the helmet. She found the helmet loan records in the documents. It contained some ambiguous statements. Juliet continued to search, and found an employee handbook. It contained information and addresses of all employees. She found the person who had borrowed the helmet. This person was named Trina. She lived in apartment 30 on the 17th floor. Juliet planned to go over and take a chance to see if she could find the borrowed helmet. The helmet was nowhere to be found, but she came across a portrait of a couple. At the bottom, it was surprisingly labeled Sorrow and Trina. Just then, Sorrow returned with chicken soup. Juliet held up the portrait and asked, "What is this about?" The Sorrow in the portrait was actually Cole Myers, an apprentice from the IT department. "Why did you take someone else's identity?"
I am the IT Shadow! You don't know what you're talking about! Don't say those words to me! Don't you ever! I am Solo!
Juliet was frightened by his tone. She quickly looked for a chance to leave. On the other side, Knox and Sherry were surrounded by the residents. The two of them were no match for the crowd. A riot was on the verge of breaking out. In this critical moment, David's wife Camille appeared. She took Knox and Sherry away, under the guise of being the judge's wife. As they reached a concealed corner, Camille released them without permission. She did this not out of kindness, but to help her husband. She wanted everyone to see how incompetent the Justice Department was without David. Late at night, in order to capture the fleeing criminals, the Justice Department set up roadblocks on the mid-levels to prevent the criminals from escaping to other floors. However, this also blocked many ordinary citizens. The Justice Department's actions had already caused dissatisfaction among the public. Amundsen, who replaced David as the head of the security department, was reporting progress to Bernard. Surveillance footage showed Mikhail taking Knox and Sherry away and hiding them on the 73rd floor. Bernard was extremely angry upon hearing this. He ordered Amundsen to bring them back. At the same time, the sheriff and Deputy Hank followed the trail and found Patrick, who had thrown the Molotov cocktails. He was hiding in a secret passage on the lower level, with wounds still bleeding. The sheriff instructed Hank to get the medical kit. In an attempt to calm Patrick down, to gain his trust, the sheriff handed him a page that Juliet had left behind. Possessing such contraband in the silo is a serious crime, the sheriff explained. If I really wanted to harm you, you could use this to kill me. Upon hearing this, Patrick let his guard down.
Get me a doctor, not a deputy Band-Aid, and I'll tell you everything you want to know.
As the sheriff gradually approached the truth, Knox took Sherry back to the dockworker's place and directly captured him to take the elevator. The two disguised themselves as dockworkers to evade the guard's surveillance. However, the security department staff monitoring the screens still detected their movements and reported to their supervisor, Amundsen. The latter quickly rushed to the scene to stop them. Knox and Sherry simply secured the elevator to the railing.
At least we'll die in the down deep.
And jumped down hand in hand. The cable quickly reached its limit, and people on the lower level reached out to grab them. Amundsen quickly fired his gun to cut the cable. The rope swung towards Knox's back due to inertia. He endured the pain and continued to climb up. Unexpectedly, Amundsen detached the elevator and let it fall. The machine brushed past Knox. Amundsen cursed under his breath in anger. At the same time, the ordinary citizens blocked by the roadblocks also rose up in resistance. They broke through the barriers and surged out. Bernard was unable to free himself, so he had to contact the sheriff on the lower levels and asked him to catch the fugitive at all costs. The sheriff agreed initially to avoid raising suspicion. Finally, let's take a look at Juliet. She was weak not because of hunger, but because her wound had become infected. With a high fever, Juliet collapsed to the ground. In doing so, she spotted the helmet under the bed. At this moment in Silo 18, the roadblocks on the 130th floor were still holding strong. The strike team was on high alert, delaying the supply of goods to the lower levels. Everyone could only gather together to protest. Meanwhile, Sherry and Knox regrouped with Walker to better contend with the upper levels. The mechanical department produced a large number of weapons.
I asked Mark to turn away anyone asking him to make weapons.
We make them only for you.
The upper levels not only confiscated supplies, but also dropped rat poison on the food reserves of the lower echelons. This means there are also spies planted by the mayor in the lower levels. Bernard firmly believed in one truth: as long as they miss 9 meals in a row, a normally functioning society will descend into chaos. He waited like a vulture. He was waiting like a vulture for the lower-level residents to reveal their flaws. At this moment, Knox and Sherry were explaining to the lower-level residents that they had been framed by Bernard and didn't actually kill Judge Aim. But the people didn't care about the truth. They only wanted the food supply restored to protect their children from starvation. Seeing that the situation was about to spiral out of control, Walker stood on a higher platform to signal them not to panic. If we kill each other and blame one another, won't that play right into Bernard's hands?
We're mechanical. We don't fight over food. We share it. We don't blame each other for shortages. We pool our resources. We tighten our belts.
We don't want to starve! We don't want to starve!
What good are pretty words? The key is to solve the food issue. Knox signaled his men to bring over a car filled with supplies dropped by the upper-level residents through the garbage pipes. Attached was a note thanking the mechanical department for their ongoing efforts to provide power, and ending with the slogan, "Juliet is not dead." Bernard quickly received the news and immediately stationed strike team members at the entrances of the garbage pipes. No matter what food the mechanical department received, it wouldn't last long. Bernard glanced at Kyle's progress in deciphering the love letter, and then went to find Camille to question her.
Camille, I heard that you helped Judge Meadows' murderers the other day.
Camille falsely claimed she was just responding to a request from her superiors to assist in the search operation. When they reached the 90th floor, they happened to see Knox and Sherry being harassed by the residents. The Justice Department has regulations that vigilante justice is illegal, so I took the initiative to take them to a safe place. and then notified the Justice Department's security department via radio to inform them of the location of those two, and asked the security department to dispatch a rescue team. But to my surprise, before reinforcements arrived, those two had already escaped. The two maintained a facade of peace. Meanwhile, the sheriff was arranging for a doctor for Patrick. Technically, it was a medical apprentice, because the doctor was trapped in the mid-levels with his family. Although the apprentice could also remove bullets, only the doctor had powerful anesthetics. He only had a few boxes of aspirin on hand. The sheriff had no choice but to contact his wife Catherine through the police station's computer and asked her to help find a doctor. Catherine immediately went to ask Juliet's father, Peter.
I think there's a process for requesting a doctor through the sheriff's department.
I'd rather not do it that way.
Peter didn't refuse Catherine's request. However, he was stopped by the strike team members at the roadblock. Catherine had to lie. There is a pregnant woman in the lower levels who urgently needs a cesarean section. There are only 2 doctors in the silo qualified to perform this surgery. If something happens to this pregnant woman, you will violate Article 12 of the Charter, which states, depriving citizens of their right to life-saving treatment. The strike team members didn't want to take on the responsibility, so they had to make an exception and let the 2 go. Meanwhile, the sheriff found Walker to ask questions. After all, Bernard had ordered him to capture the murderer of AIM. The sheriff should investigate first. However, Walker stated that he had no comment. If you want to get information from me, you need to first find the head of the supply department, Mike. She was captured in the cafe on the 70th floor. I need to know if Mike is safe. Otherwise, you won't get any information from me. Meanwhile, Knox led a team to the partition area on the 130th floor. They came in forcefully, and the doorman urged his accomplices to find Amundsen. Tell him that the mechanical department is here to cause trouble. We need tactical defense equipment. Diego from the security department seemed to want to say something, but Amundsen ignored him. Diego had no choice but to find David, to inform him that the mechanical department was gathering and preparing to attack the roadblock.
I'm sure Mr. Amundsen is aware.
He is, but he doesn't know what I know.
Because the cameras below the 120th floor were all broken, the security department had to rely on informants to relay messages. Diego had a very trusted informant, who brought news that this group of lower-level people was moving up armed, while another group was heading in the opposite direction. In addition to weapons, they were equipped with a chainsaw. That specialized chainsaw is used for cutting concrete. David immediately went to report to the mayor. Bernard wasn't in the room. Only Kyle was inside deciphering the love letters code. Catherine saw her husband looking grave, and privately approached him to inquire about the situation. Upon learning that the lower-level people wanted to drill through the floor for a raid, Catherine had to warn David, "You are a judge now, and legally you shouldn't intervene. This matter can only be handled by her." As the situation continued to escalate over there, Peter and his companions successfully met up with the sheriff and helped Patrick remove the bullet. This guy was unwilling to share the promised information. The sheriff ordered everyone else to leave first, as he wanted to have a chat with Patrick alone. The sheriff walked up to Patrick's bedside,
which is you telling me what you said you were going to tell me,
and took out a radio intercom. He warned Patrick, "If you don't speak up, I will contact David." "Oh, I forgot to tell you, David is now the judge of the silo." Patrick had to speak up. "Do you know why all the computers in the silo were shut down when Juliet escaped? The reason wasn't system maintenance, but because Juliet played a certain scene from the hard drive on every computer, which was the way the world on the ground used to be, more beautiful than any photo album, but it only played for about 10 seconds, before being cut off by the mayor and others, including myself. Everyone who saw the video was arrested. David came to find me, and asked me to go to the oil town below, to throw Molotov cocktails at the police station Hank was in charge of. In exchange, David promised to give me drugs that would let me forget everything that had happened in the past 22 years. It was obvious that David didn't fulfill his promise to hand over the drugs. On the other side, after Knox diverted the strike team's attention, Sherry and the others sawed open 130 floors of the floor. They climbed up to the opposite residential building. However, Camille brought people over to warn Amundsen that Sherry and the others' actions had been exposed. Knox ordered to launch the offensive early. They violently broke through the iron doors on the 130th floor. In a coordinated double assault with Sherry's group, they breached the strike team's defenses. Fortunately, with Camille's help, Amundsen led the armed forces to block Knox and his group. However, the mechanical department showed no fear.
We'll kill 10 of us, but we will kill all of you.
Amundsen knew that once war broke out, the silo would inevitably fall into chaos, so he agreed to Knox's request to adjust the number of layers for the roadblock. Little did he know that this agreement would ruin Bernard's plan. Because Knox gained control of the mid-level farms, he would no longer have to worry about food supply. Originally, the mechanical department's feigned assault was to seize the farm levels. After learning about David's actions, the sheriff began to suspect the truth behind Aim's death. With Knox and Sherry's clarifications that they didn't harm Aim, the sheriff finally couldn't help but contact Bernard to announce that he would initiate a comprehensive investigation into Aim's death. Bernard was afraid of exposing the scandal and cut off all wireless communication inside the silo. Seeing that the sheriff didn't arrest them, Knox politely thanked him.
I don't stand with the mayor or the judge or you.
Meanwhile, Kyle had been busy for several days, reorganizing the love letter using the Caesar shift method. He deciphered only one name from the code, Ellie. This was the name of the love letter's owner's daughter. Other than this phrase, the rest of the words were meaningless. This encryption method exceeded the scope of a simple Caesar shift. Bernard stated that if he wanted to decode it, he would have to take a look at the legacy. Kyle had never heard of this thing. He was pulled up by Bernard to take an oath. Did Bernard want to take Kyle as an apprentice? On Juliet's side, she had just regained consciousness after fainting. The wound on her arm had been bandaged by Sorrow, but he confiscated the helmet that Juliet had just found. Sorrow stated that if she wanted to get the helmet back, she needed to help him prevent the water level from rising. Otherwise, she won't be able to leave this silo. She could waste time arguing with him, or she could think of how to repair the water pump. On the other side, Bernard officially took Kyle as his apprentice and brought him down to the basement. Only a few people had ever ventured here. Inside was an artificial intelligence computer. Bernard helped Kyle enter the access permissions. Next door, the legacy room was dazzling. There were numerous prohibited books that were strictly forbidden, and countless historical artifacts. These materials covered the entirety of human history, knowledge, and art. Bernard also said that the books in the legacy room were just a part of the basement library. Much more content had been digitized and stored on a tablet. Bernard granted Kyle so many permissions in order to decipher Salvador Quinn's love letter. Meanwhile, the mechanical department was also preparing. Knox had somehow gotten hold of a canister of gunpowder and filled it into a special device designed by Walker. They lit the fuse, and the small rocket shot up into the sky with a whoosh. Then it deployed its parachute and scattered a large number of paper pieces into the air. Hearing the explosion, Bernard dropped Kyle and rushed outside to check the situation. He reached out and grabbed a piece of paper to check. It had several questions written on it. How did Juliet actually die? What truth was the IT department hiding? Immediately afterward, Sherry pulled the power switch, plunging the silo into darkness. Only the IT department still had its lights on. The mechanical department quickly restored power supply. After all, they only wanted to pressure Bernard, not to kill high-level residents. Bernard went to see Minister of Supply Mike. She had always had a close relationship with the mechanical department. Mike might know the source of the gunpowder. Upon hearing this, Mike wanted to negotiate terms with Bernard, asking him to guarantee the safety of Sherry, Knox, and Walker. Bernard immediately refused and got up to leave. At the same time, David was deep in thought. Amundsen clearly wasn't capable of handling the security director position, so he wanted to talk to Bernard. Camille immediately stopped her husband upon hearing this. Bernard doesn't take you seriously at all. If you go to him, you're helping him. If you wait for him to come to you, that would be making a deal. At this moment, Bernard was calming the upper-level residents. He claimed that the sheriff had been taken hostage by the mechanical department. Until then, all radio communications in the silo would remain shut down. Some people also questioned why the IT department still had its lights on, while the other areas of the silo were dark. Bernard explained that the power was controlled by the mechanical department. They could keep the IT department powered for a few minutes to raise suspicion about our department. Although Bernard managed to stabilize the situation, the seeds of doubt had already been sown. Bernard instructed Amundsen to obtain a search warrant for the supply department. The previous questioning of Mike was just a formality. Even if they could extract some information, Bernard didn't trust the information provided by Mike. He wanted to conduct the search himself, to see if the supply department was hiding gunpowder. Amundsen said that the Chief Justice had not approved the search warrant, and that he sent word wanting to talk to you. Bernard angrily went to see David.
I assigned you this position, this promotion, because I never wanted to see your face again. There are no more conversations between us, no discussions. You sign what I tell you to sign, you sit behind that desk, you pretend to have power, and then you go home. That's it. That's the rest of your life. Now get out your rubber stamp and give me my fucking search warrant.
David no longer indulged Bernard. I worked hard for 10 years to become an apprentice in the IT department, but you never considered me at all. Bernard retorted. Do you know why you can't become an apprentice in the IT department? Because you are good at solving problems, but lack the curiosity to explore and think about them. David felt that Bernard had poor judgment of character. Neither Amundsen nor Kyle was capable of great use. The road ahead would be very difficult. Bernard angrily shot back. It's not your place to criticize me. Your wife was the one who secretly let Knox and Sherry go. Bernard had just returned to his office when Kyle rushed in. He had uncovered the secret of the love letter. It contained a book cipher. Each number represented a word that could be found by page number in the corresponding book. But the problem was that there were no matching books in the legacy room. Bernard couldn't help but think of the copy of The Wizard of Oz that AIM never left behind. He quickly pulled it out and handed it to Kyle. Meanwhile, David returned home to question his wife about why she let Knox and Sherry go without permission. Camille admitted that no one knew how this situation would end now, so neither Bernard nor the mechanical department could be offended by us. Only by doing this could they ensure safety. David understood his wife's actions, but he demanded that Camille be honest with him. On the other side, the sheriff and Hank went to question Knox. They believed that launching gunpowder towards the upper levels could likely endanger everyone's safety. Such an approach was too radical. Knox told the sheriff not to interfere in the mechanical department's affairs. If you have time, it's better to find out who is poisoning the food in the lower levels. After hearing this, the sheriff began to investigate. He and Hank first found Martin, the head of the trash room, because the connections between the floors had been cut off. If Bernard wanted to contact the lower level spies, he would definitely give instructions through the trash pipes. Under the pressure of questioning, Martin had to confess. The Justice Department did indeed throw notes into a specific trash bin, but I really don't know who the poisoner is. To prove he wasn't lying, Martin voluntarily revealed that in today's trash bin there was a new note. The Justice Department wanted the spies to assassinate Knox and Sherry. To be safe, the sheriff detained Knox and Sherry to prevent the spies from finding an opportunity to act. Before long, there was progress in the poisoning case. The lunch lady had a conflict with the residents because she pointed out that food was toxic and not allowed for everyone to eat. Someone stood up and accused the lunch lady of being the poisoner. In a critical moment, Hank stepped in to control the situation. He knew that the lunch lady's mother was seriously ill and was currently trapped in a hospital on the upper levels. She was most likely trying to protect her mother and was threatened by the Justice Department to poison the food. But the lunch lady didn't want to harm anyone, which is why she claimed the food was poisoned to keep them from eating it.
What about the kill order on Knox and Shirley?
Told me to plant that note. They said that it would upset people. Please, don't kill me.
Of course, Knox and the others wouldn't kill her. They just punished the lunch lady to do some hard labor at home as penance. Everyone was busy fighting against the security department. Only Walker wanted to rescue Mike. After hesitating, she activated a camera. Amundsen detected fluctuations and reported to Bernard that the camera in the Walker workshop had just been activated for 30 seconds. All the cameras in the lower levels had been turned off. Why would she risk turning it back on? An employee from the security department interjected. I tracked Mike's movements over the past few days in an attempt to find the source of the gunpowder and discovered that Mike and Walker were very close. So I checked the records and learned that they were partners 25 years ago. Although they had divorced, they still cared for each other. Upon hearing this, Bernard realized he had grasped a key piece of leverage. Over at Juliet's side, the water pump she needed to restart was 8 levels underwater. Juliet planned to find a waterproof cable to supply power from the IT department to the water pump, but the cable needed to be at least 90 meters long. By the time Juliet solved the problem on her end, the 18th silo would likely have perished. Due to the turmoil, she implored Sorrow to let her go back to save people first. Juliet promised she would return to address the water level issue.
Yeah, but what if your suit fails and you die out there?
Sorrow wouldn't allow any unexpected situations to occur. He insisted that Juliet fix the water pump before leaving. Fortunately, Sorrow was very familiar with this place. He really found a bundle of waterproof cables. He also made a bell. As long as the escape line was pulled underwater, the bell would ring. At that time, Sorrow would activate the winch to pull Juliet up. Moreover, he emphasized that he had read about decompression sickness in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. If a person comes up too quickly from deep underwater, large bubbles would form inside their body. This could severely harm their health and even lead to death. So he would slowly operate the winch. Juliet had had enough of Sorrow's nagging. Since you understand so well, why don't you dive underwater yourself? Sorrow panicked upon hearing this, saying, I can't do that.
Why can't you? Are you scared? Because I'm scared, so why are you making me do it, huh?
Because I'm the head of IT. Silo 17 is my priority.
You're not head of IT! Stop! You're not even solo!
Juliet was just too soft-hearted. She just wanted to wrap things up and leave quickly. Sorrow handed her weighted boots to help Juliet stabilize her center of gravity underwater. In addition, he made a diving mask, using a welder's goggles as described in the book. Once everything was ready, Juliet dove into the water. Sorrow stayed behind to ensure the high-pressure washing machine was working. After Juliet entered the water, she quickly reached the floor where the pump was located and secured the safety line to the railing, and then searched the area. Entering the machinery room, Juliet pried open the valve to connect the power supply. She tugged on the rope to signal Sorrow to activate the cable. The pump resumed operation after being electrified. Juliet immediately made her exit. She signaled Sorrow to pull himself out. Then she untied the secured safety rope. Unexpectedly, the rope slipped from her hand and fell into the water. Moreover, the oxygen supply in the air tube was cut off. Juliet removed the weighted boots, and then grabbed the air tube to climb upward. The protagonist was truly amazing. She could free dive without any training, and even break world records with ease. She quickly released the pipe, and used her buoyancy to accelerate her ascent. She surfaced before her oxygen ran out. Juliet looked around but didn't see Sorrow. She felt a bit strange about it. Soon, an axe and a trail of blood came into view. Could there be a third person in Silo 17? Juliet picked up the axe on the ground and moved forward to search for someone. Suddenly, she felt a sharp pain in her body, and it was accompanied by a sharp ringing in her ears. She suspected this might be the decompression situation that Sorrow had mentioned. So Juliet pulled the air tube closer, and then dove underwater to adjust her condition. After her body slowly adapted, she surfaced again. Just as Juliet was about to continue forward, she heard a noise coming from behind her.
I don't know where you are and I don't care, okay? But the man you took has something I need.
Just as he finished speaking, a bright light appeared ahead. A man told Juliet, I have already killed the person you were looking for. If you don't get out of here, you'll die too. After saying this, he shot an arrow at Juliet. Fortunately, it didn't hit a vital area. Juliet pulled out the arrowhead and ran to the room to treat her wound. On the other side, Bernard realized that Walker and Mike had a close relationship. He entered the water and power equipment room. Meanwhile, Sherry found the sheriff and hoped he would exercise his authority to bring Bernard and the mayor to justice. But the sheriff emphasized the importance of evidence in his work. He could provide some assistance to the mechanical department within the limits of the Silos Charter. However, he couldn't arrest anyone without proof. The consequences of not adhering to social order would lead to the collapse of everything. Sherry felt that the sheriff was inflexible and didn't understand how to adapt. She bluntly said that one day, he would have to stand up and expose the upper-level lies. She then went to Walker's workshop to discuss the next plan with the key members of the mechanical department. They planned to infiltrate the medical and supply departments to find a way to smuggle some supplies back. Walker thought these people were unrealistic. How are you going to quietly infiltrate the mid-levels and steal supplies without being noticed? If you have time for risk, why not go save Mike? She is the head of the supply department. What supplies can't she get? Knox bluntly pointed out that rescuing the imprisoned Mike was much harder than infiltrating the supply department. You're letting your concern cloud your judgment. Walker didn't want to argue with them any longer and kicked them out of her workshop. Just as they left, Walker's computer received a message. Upon seeing it, she grabbed her belongings and headed upstairs. Unexpectedly, Walker encountered Sherry along the way. Sherry asked Walker where she was going. Walker explained that she received a message saying that the water pump on the 90th floor was malfunctioning and needed repair.
Walk, it's a trap.
I'm guaranteed safe passage.
From someone who they said is connected to a conspiracy to murder the judge?
For Walker, it didn't matter whether it was a trap. In fact, she hoped to be caught, so she could be imprisoned with Mike. On the other side, Kyle followed Bernard's instructions to go to the judge's apartment to find the copy of The Wizard of Oz. However, there were two of David's henchmen inside. They were very rude to Kyle. Not only did they not believe he was Bernard's apprentice, but they also stated that David had ordered them to pack things up and send them to the Justice Department. Kyle had to show his credentials and kick the two out. However, the copy of The Wizard of Oz didn't match the cipher, so he decided to use the judge's computer to search for the descendants of the love letter's author, Salvador Quinn. He found a list of addresses. Kyle knocked on the descendants' door, according to the address, but as soon as the person inside heard the name Quinn, they became very unfriendly and directly attempted to shut the door. Kyle had to pull out his IT department credentials and urge them to cooperate with his investigation. Otherwise, he would have to be dragged upstairs for questioning. The two had to let him into the house. Inside the room was a weaving machine. This family had been responsible for cleaning wool and making blankets for 4 generations. Kyle directly stated his purpose. A book was missing from the IT department's records, and it was likely taken by Mr. Quinn. I suspect this book is still in the hands of his descendants. The uncle impatiently replied, "Why would we keep his things? Quinn only brought shame and disgrace to this family." Kyle didn't believe this line of reasoning. "Since you refuse to be honest, I may have to call in the Justice Department's search team." After saying this, Kyle turned to leave. Unexpectedly, the uncle chased after him.
You haven't had that badge very long, have you? I see you trying so hard to be a tough guy.
I have to say, the uncle was quite perceptive. He knew that Kyle wasn't a hard person, so he also spoke the truth. "Our family never discusses Quinn, even for generations. We have honestly cleaned wool to make amends for the mistakes he made back then. Due to mismanagement, the rebels erased the server's content and burned a large number of books, so Quinn has always been the culprit of the silo." But Bernard told Kyle that it was Quinn who saved the silo before he held a significant position. Rebellions occurred approximately every 20 years in the silo. Some of these even led to the airlock being opened, almost killing 10,000 residents. Quinn realized that the root cause of the rebellion in the silo was that people knew too much history. Everyone wanted to emulate those before them and resist the upper levels in search of the truth. So he wanted to isolate the silo from history by shutting down server access and burning books. Then he shifted all the blame onto the rebels. Kyle found this impossible to believe. If Quinn was the true culprit behind the book burnings, then why has no one come forward to expose him in over 100 years? Bernard revealed a shocking secret. Because Quinn put certain substances in the water, these compounds could cause people to gradually forget over weeks, months, or even years. This measure secured 140 years of peace for the silo. At the same time, David learned through his subordinates that Kyle had become the new apprentice. He angrily sought out Amundsen for answers. How did that kid seduce Bernard? And how did he become an apprentice in the IT department? Amundsen replied, "Let's not talk about whether I know the reason. Even if I did, I couldn't tell you. The Minister of Justice is just a figurehead." After David's failed attempt to extract information, his wife approached Amundsen as a negotiator. Camille started with the emotional aspect, asking Amundsen if he remembered when he was still an agent. "He was once invited to dinner at our home by David. That was the first time my husband invited a subordinate. If I remember correctly, your wife is about to give birth. As parents, you must create a good environment for your child. But now the silo is out of control. The mayor has even taken on a minor as an apprentice. We can't trust Bernard's judgment." Amundsen was persuaded by Camille and went back to send a message to David. He arranged to meet him in the apple orchard on the planting level, and he informed David about Kyle's movements. After Kyle left the judge's office, he went to an apartment in the mid-lower levels. His goal was to find a book that belonged to Quinn. David also wanted to ask him to continue reporting on Kyle's situation, but he was immediately rejected by Amundsen. The reason he came this time was due to David's previous guidance. Now the favor has been repaid. We owe each other nothing. And don't send Camille to find me anymore. Meanwhile, Kyle was at Quinn's descendants' home. He apologized for his earlier intrusion and questioning, but he asked the uncle to believe that Quinn wasn't a villain. He had once saved the silo. As for the reasons, Kyle couldn't disclose them. Suddenly, the hostess spoke up. "When Judge Aim visited us, she mentioned this as well. And like you, she also wanted to find a book." According to the hostess, Aim had exchanged 2 leftover books for Quinn's old version of the charter. Upon hearing this, Kyle immediately returned to the judge's office and found the old charter. Quinn's name was written on the title page. He took out his notebook to compare and decode it. A piece of information sprang to life on the page.
If you've gotten this far, you already know the game is rigged.
Kyle left with his backpack. He was stopped by David. As soon as he stepped outside, David immediately searched his bag. He couldn't understand what Bernard wanted with the charter. Kyle remained calm in the crisis, because this belonged to Aim. David knew that the mayor had a special interest in AIM. He didn't question this statement. He reminded Kyle, Bernard only sees you as a tool. Once he's done using you, he'll toss you back to the mines. Seeing that Kyle was unmoved, he used Kyle's mother as leverage. Kyle paused at the mention of his mother, but he still quickly left the hallway. Walker arrived at the water and power equipment room on the 90th floor to make repairs. Unexpectedly, Bernard had been waiting there for a long time. He bluntly stated, to maintain the stability of the silo, I will go to any lengths, if you're willing to do me a favor, and inform the mechanical department of all plans in advance. I can guarantee Mike's safety.
Take solace in knowing that 10,000 of your fellow citizens will be grateful for your cooperation.
Can I see her now?
Of course.
When the members of the mechanical department descended to the upper levels via the zipline to prepare for smuggling supplies, Amundsen had already surrounded them with his men. Walker finally saw Mike as she had wished, but he was unconscious and couldn't hear her voice.
I will make you this promise. No harm will come to her if you continue to cooperate.
You're quite the bastard, aren't you?
Yes or no?
Yes, damn it.
After Bernard asked Walker to return, turned on the camera in the workshop, and didn't expect any other actions. I will send someone to monitor your actions. Walker returned and turned on the cameras. Sherry came in the next moment, and said, our action team has been captured. There must be the mayor's spies in the lower levels. Walker felt very guilty inside, but she couldn't say anything to protect Mike. She could only wait until Sherry left, and angrily hit the camera with his middle finger. Meanwhile, Juliet bandaged her wound and went out to investigate. She discovered a body lying ahead, covered with a tattered cloth. Juliet thought it was Sorrow. Just as she approached, the person underneath suddenly sprang up. Fortunately, she reacted quickly and was agile, quickly subduing the faux corpse. Juliet removed the helmet from him, and discovered that it was actually a girl. Then her two companions arrived. Surprisingly, there were still living people in the silo. Where did these people come from? Let's turn the clock back to the day Juliet first entered Silo 18. Actually, from that moment on, these three had been secretly observing her actions. Helen, uncertain of the visitor's intentions, decided to find a chance to kill Juliet. So, when Juliet went down to the lower levels, she cut the rope that had been tied. This caused Juliet to fall into the water, but Helen's brother Ari felt some pity, so he threw a bucket into the water to help Juliet swim back to the shore. Helen couldn't understand her brother's intentions. She couldn't help but have a fight with him. Both of them went to bed in silence. Suddenly, they were awakened by noises outside. Peeking through the crack, they saw Juliet had built a makeshift bridge, and was talking to Sorrow.
We have to kill him.
This time, they planned to ambush Sorrow, while Juliet was underwater fixing the pump. They crept up behind Sorrow to launch a surprise attack. Unexpectedly, Sorrow appeared a bit slow-witted, but his body responded very quickly. Sorrow pinned Ari down and tried to throw him downstairs. In their struggle, they cut the gas line, causing Juliet's oxygen to suddenly cut off. Sorrow and Ari fought fiercely, and the axe in their hands was thrown away. Seeing the situation was critical, Helen quickly shot an arrow at Sorrow. They didn't immediately kill him, because only Sorrow could access the pantry for food. Ari and Helen dragged Sorrow away, and left their accomplice, Foodie, to guard him. Once Juliet returned to shore to report, Foodie intentionally cut his palm, to leave a trail of blood near the equipment to mislead Juliet. He intended to take this woman hostage, and threatened Sorrow to hand over the pantry code, but Helen disagreed. She insisted on killing Juliet to eliminate the threat.
No one wants to hear your ideas, all right? Just keep a lookout and let us know if she's coming or not.
Foodie didn't follow Helen's instructions. She deliberately disguised herself as Sorrow's corpse, to lure Juliet closer. However, Foodie underestimated Juliet's combat skills, and was quickly subdued by Juliet.
We can trade. You set him free, and I'll let her go.
We don't give a shit about her.
Ari didn't want to take things too far. He negotiated with Juliet despite Helen's opposition. If you can open the pantry, you can talk to Sorrow, to prevent Juliet from launching a surprise attack. Ari also had Foodie keep an eye on her, but the problem was that Juliet didn't know the pantry code. Foodie asked her, "Do you really want to leave here? Can you take me with you?" Juliet explained, "I only have one suit of protective gear, and I don't have the pantry code." But Foodie said, "I can help you." As they passed by the pantry, they saw two corpses. Foodie noticed one of the bodies had a bracelet, and seemed to recall some bad memories. Juliet searched through the office files for information related to Director Russell IT. In order to find clues about the password, she asked Foodie to help her search, and asked her if she knew the two dead people. Foodie revealed the hidden truth. It turned out that those two people were Ari's mother and Helen's father. They became a couple after their partners passed away, and had a young brother, Benny, for Helen and Ari. At the moment of her mother's death, she entrusted her daughter to this couple for care, but to the couple, Foodie was just an extra mouth to feed, because the food supplies at home were severely insufficient. The couple took the risk to try to break into the pantry. They were killed by Sorrow, who was guarding it. That's why Helen resented Foodie for her mother's death, and gave her a malicious nickname. Helen and Ari have no blood relation, so now they have also become a couple, and they even had a son together. Juliet had witnessed too many tragedies, and understood Foodie's difficulties, but the urgent task was to find the pantry code. Foodie quickly found an envelope, with the full name of IT Director Russell, and the address of the supply department. The two hurried to that address to search. To their surprise, they found a complete set of protective gear hidden in the wardrobe. Juliet closed the cabinet door, and didn't reveal the truth to Foodie. Instead, she asked about that couple before. Did they find the secret to the pantry?
They gave up looking for it. They just kept trying new numbers. Don't know how they kept track.
Upon hearing this, Juliet suddenly looked at the blackboard. Previously, she had erased some numbers on it to design a diving device. Now she recalled that the numbers on the blackboard were likely the couple's records of eliminating the code, but the last part had been erased by Juliet. She could only deduce the erased part based on the previous arrangement. The elderly couple must have figured out the code, or else Sorrow wouldn't have killed them both. In the end, Juliet calculated 6 possible codes, but her first 2 attempts were incorrect. If she failed a third time, the pantry door would be locked for 24 hours, and Sorrow would be killed by Helen. Foodie envied that everyone had official names. Juliet casually replied, "These are just the names stolen by Sorrow." Then she suddenly remembered a memory. Sorrow had once carried a backpack, and recalled sitting next to that girl. At that time, Juliet had asked Sorrow, when the rebellion broke out, the owner of the backpack was at most 12 years old. "How could you sit next to her?" Sorrow had brushed it off casually back then, but now Juliet realized he was lying. Juliet asked Foodie, "How old were you during the rebellion?" Foodie replied, "I wasn't even born then. Even my parents were just kids." From this, it was clear that during the rebellion, Sorrow was just a 12-year-old kid. How could he possibly be an IT apprentice? Juliet returned to the classroom, and found the locker next to the backpack girls. It had the name Jimmy Conroy written on it. This was Sorrow's real name, and it shared the same surname as IT Director Russell. Juliet wanted to talk to Jimmy, so she found Ari to discuss. "Although I haven't found the code yet, I've narrowed it down to 6 combinations. If I can just talk to Jimmy, I can get the final code."
No, I don't. I don't need to. I could just leave, right? I don't need to get into the fucking vault. You do.
Foodie stopped Juliet, and stepped forward to persuade Ari. At this moment, Jimmy was in terrible condition due to his injuries. He kept repeating that he had failed. "I didn't protect the pantry well." Juliet told Jimmy not to be nervous. They just wanted to get some food. Even if he revealed the code, it wouldn't endanger the pantry.
Russell chose me to be his shadow.
No.
I am the only one left to keep the vault safe.
You were never his shadow. You were his son.
No wonder these two have the same surname. Originally, Jimmy was Russell's biological son. Just as she finished speaking, Helen suddenly appeared. She wanted to kill Jimmy to avenge her mother, but Jimmy said, "I didn't kill them." Those two broke the code and entered the pantry. They even wanted to kill the sleeping Jimmy. He broke the doorknob to protect himself, trapping the two in the food pantry to suffocate. Helen believed Jimmy was lying. Our parents wouldn't just shoot randomly. Juliet lifted Jimmy's shirt upon hearing this, and discovered bullet hole scars on his body. Helen's expression faltered.
We'll figure it out eventually ourselves, right? So we don't need him. One less.
Juliet didn't move her body. Jimmy was just a 12-year-old child during the rebellion. He shouldn't be held responsible for all of this.
Well, the sheriff held a gun to his father's head. All he had to do was open the door and he didn't, so... Does that sound like the son of a hero to you? Russell would have been ashamed to have a son like that.
Jimmy had confined himself to the pantry for decades, to avoid disobeying his father's advice. He wanted to protect the silo, but forgot that his dad told him not to go out, not to protect the pantry, but to protect Jimmy. Juliet explained this reasoning to him. She wanted Jimmy to understand Russell's good intentions as a father. Similarly, Helen also had children to care for, which is why she wanted to know the pantry code. Jimmy was shaken upon hearing this. He opened the pantry door and let everyone inside. Inside, the space was spacious. filled with all sorts of intriguing gadgets. Jimmy handed the protective gear to Juliet. Juliet couldn't help but ask, "There's another set in the supply department, right? Why did you lie to me?" Jimmy didn't answer but countered, "Since you found that set of gear, why not just leave?" Although Juliet didn't respond, Jimmy knew she was trying to save him. Meanwhile, Kyle was talking to Bernard. He learned from the notes that the founders built more than one silo. There are about 50 places like this. Bernard wasn't surprised. He pointed out that there should actually be 51, but one of them has already perished. Juliet likely entered that abandoned silo. There was almost no chance of survival. Bernard also said that all IT directors and their apprentices know the number of silos. Quinn couldn't possibly encrypt this information. You continue the investigation. To see if there's any other information, Kyle could only go back to continue deciphering. Meanwhile, Quinn in the notes was guiding Kyle to the bottom level of the silo. There was a tunnel there that could provide the answers he sought. Kyle immediately went to find Amundsen and asked where Bernard was now. He had important matters to report. However, Amundsen was arrogant. He said the mayor didn't want to be disturbed tonight. Hearing this, Kyle went to find his mother. He handed over the old charter to her for safekeeping. Kyle was going to venture into the lower levels to investigate. He had an IT apprentice ID card that allowed him passage, but just as he passed through the gate, he was captured by the lower level people. They didn't trust anyone from the IT department.
Wait, I knew Juliet Nichols!
Like hell you did. Her boyfriend's name was George.
Shirley rushed over upon hearing the news. At first, she didn't trust Kyle, but he mentioned that Juliet might still be alive.
Where?
I'll tell you. But only if you take me where I need to go.
Kyle followed Shirley to the bottom level and informed her about the secret tunnel there. Shirley found this news hard to believe because the bottom level was filled with water. Kyle guessed that there might be a water pump below, but nobody knew that to prove it, they had to dive into the water and risk their own lives. Kyle secured a rope to himself, preparing to dive. He found a tunnel at the bottom. In the next moment, a voice from the AI echoed above him. Before Kyle, only 3 people had ever reached this door. They were Quinn, AIM, and Juliet's boyfriend George.
Quinn and Meadows were both given the same directive you will now receive. If you speak to anyone about this conversation, or what you have seen down here, we will have no choice but to initiate the safeguard. Do you know what the safeguard is, Mr. Kyle?
Meanwhile, the sheriff and Knox gathered together. They wanted to identify the mole in the lower levels. If someone hadn't leaked the news about the raid on the supply department, their people wouldn't have been captured. But it's difficult to find the leaker. Just by relying on the people at the bottom, they'd better find someone at the top to help. Knox thought of Camille. Although she was David's wife, she had previously let me and Shirley go. At this moment, the mole walker was anxiously in the workshop. Knox heard about this situation and specifically came to comfort her, telling her not to worry too much. Now we have the sheriff on our side, and they will surely find a way to rescue Mike. Unbeknownst to them, Bernard was monitoring their conversation through surveillance. Walker felt uneasy seeing Knox trust her so much. She felt really uncomfortable inside. After Bernard learned about the sheriff's betrayal, he quickly called a meeting with the police department and falsely claimed that the lower levels raid on the supply department was orchestrated by the sheriff, so now they would remove him from his position. In addition, all officers and support personnel were dispatched to the dining area of this level to convert it into a temporary prison cell. Knox was puzzled about how the mole sent the message to Bernard. There were no computers or porters here. Unless the mole could get through the roadblocks, Knox became serious as he thought about this.
What is it? I know who betrayed us.
After saying this, Knox went to find Walker. He also pointed out that Teddy's mother might be a spy. Teddy was an unfortunate soul arrested by the upper levels. Before the raid on the supply department yesterday, Knox had seen Teddy's mother. It must have been this woman who leaked information to the upper levels to protect her son. Next, Knox mentioned that they still had some gunpowder on hand, which they planned to use for other operations. Bernard perked up upon hearing this. At this moment, the sheriff used the excuse of submitting historical artifacts to arrange a meeting with David. At the upper and lower level gates, he expressed his desire to see Camille and slipped a note to David, saying, "Once you read this, you'll help me." The note was actually a page from a nature book, featuring blue skies and white clouds. It made one wonder if the outside world could truly be this beautiful. The couple realized they could no longer remain neutral. They had to choose a side now. At the same time, Knox gathered his trusted aides for a meeting in Walker's workshop. He planned to lead a team to attack the roadblocks in an hour, to draw the upper-level soldiers' attention. Then, another team would blow up the generator. The schedule for the plan must not be leaked, or else everything would be in vain. But blowing up the generator would endanger everyone in the silo. Fortunately, Bernard overheard Knox's plan through the surveillance. He dispatched people to the roadblocks to arrest the rebels. Then he sent soldiers to guard the generator. On the other side, Kyle climbed back to the surface via the vertical ladder. He took down the guard sent by Shirley, and prepared to go to the top floor quickly. But halfway there, he was accidentally shot by assault soldiers. A major battle was about to break out. Knox and Shirley led the charge against the enemy. The sheriff was just about to go home, to move his wife and children, when he was arrested by his colleagues at the police station. Most of the people from the mechanical department were captured.
You choose the wrong side.
By delivering Billing's message? Either way, it's time. You find a way into the vault, and I'll get our boy.
The soldiers locked the arrested individuals in the dining area. Kyle was among them. Shirley asked him what was down in the lower levels. Kyle replied that it wasn't important. I need to make a trip to the upper levels. Amundsen conveyed the mayor's thanks to Walker. Knox and Mike were very disappointed upon hearing this.
You both are free to go.
Get the fuck away from me. I'm not going anywhere. Oh, he sends you out to clean.
It seemed that Bernard had achieved a great victory, but what message did David and his wife bring? At this moment, Juliet's doctor father was sending the injured to a floor with medical services. Unexpectedly, a timer fell to the ground. The doctor didn't notice this, and kept confirming the watch nervously. After dismissing the special forces, he lifted the cover off the injured. It turned out that the deputy sheriff was hidden underneath, and there was a timed bomb as well. As they were about to check the timer, they found it missing. At this moment, the soldiers guarding the generator confirmed that there were no bombs connected above. They quickly dispatched someone to inform the mayor. Unbeknownst to them, Bernard was meeting with Walker. Walker was telling him a story about the generator. The noise of the generator was loud, so employees had to shout to communicate. For many years, the mechanical department developed a system of hand signals, so when Bernard monitored the conversations in the lower levels, he didn't realize that their hand movements were conveying completely different meanings from what they were saying. They intentionally had Bernard send people to the lower level to guard the generator. As for the recipient of David's message, it was the sheriff's most trusted subordinate. She freed the imprisoned sheriff and others, helping them gain access to the upper levels. Walker glanced at his watch. At this moment, the bomb was about to explode. She confidently began the countdown, but there was no sound of the bomb going off. Over at Silo 18, Jimmy returned to the room where he lived as a child. He found a torn piece of paper on the table. It had the word safeguard procedure written on it. Jimmy seemed to think of something. He called Juliet back and said, "I have a way to save the people in your silo." Jimmy explained while holding the note. "I've heard my parents mention this safeguard procedure. It will kill everyone inside the silo." Although Jimmy didn't know what his parents had done, he had indeed stopped the procedure. Juliet urged Jimmy to think carefully about what had happened that day. Jimmy stumbled through his memories incoherently, when suddenly he recalled a crucial clue. The word safeguard seemed related to a pipe, and his parents had been trying to cap that pipe, because there was enough poison inside to kill everyone. The two quickly flipped through the map, and pinpointed the 14th floor, where Jimmy's mother had worked. On the other side, the bomb's timer malfunctioned, so it didn't explode as planned. The doctor took off his watch, and handed it to the deputy sheriff, asking him to pass it on to Juliet if he saw her. Then the doctor urged the deputy sheriff to leave quickly. He manually activated the bomb. With a loud boom, it echoed directly into Silo 18.
You're out of time. What? You need to get home now. Shit.
The doctor had destroyed the stairs connecting to the lower levels. As a result, the soldiers Bernard sent out to guard the generator were trapped below and unable to return. Meanwhile, Knox opened the dining area door to release all of his imprisoned subordinates. Now the upper levels had been taken over by the mechanical department. Bernard had fallen into Knox's trap. Just then, Kyle suddenly approached.
I need you to look like we are having a serious conversation. Just listen. Don't say a word. Because if it hears this, we're dead.
Kyle told Bernard, "There is a safeguard system at the bottom of the silo that can release poison gas to kill everyone at any time. Now, no matter how we struggle, it will be in vain." After saying this, he resigned from his apprentice position. Bernard then shoved the basement key into David's hands. "Don't you want to be my apprentice? Then go ahead. The code is 552039. After Bernard said this, he went back to his place to grab his backpack. Then, under everyone's gaze, he walked into the dining area. Bernard fired several shots to command everyone to leave. Then he stopped one of the men to be his helper. David went to find Kyle and pressed him to find out what he had said to Bernard. But Kyle fearlessly walked toward the window. "If you want to shoot, then go ahead. After all, everything is going to end. But I advise you, while there's still time, hurry and open the basement door to see what the inheritance chamber looks like. Understand the intentions of this lifetime." Knox and the others had not yet tasted the joy of victory. When the residents of the silo lost control, they shouted that the outside world was beautiful, just like the previous Silo 18. "We want to leave the silo and see for ourselves." These people vented years of anger like madmen. However, Bernard sat in the empty police station, with a gun in his hand.
Bernard, we need you now.
I don't know what's going through your head, but we need you to come out. We need you to tell the people the truth.
Before the sheriff could finish speaking, he was carried away. The crowd was determined to use a battering ram to smash the dining area glass and escape. However, a figure suddenly appeared on the hill. The roaring crowd fell silent. The person was none other than the alive Juliet. Bernard heard the noise and came out to check. Juliet was holding a white cloth up to the camera, warning everyone that it was dangerous outside, and they must not come out. Then she tried to pry open the silo door to get in, but after several attempts, she had no success. Just when Juliet felt helpless, the silo door suddenly opened. As she was about to return to the silo, she saw Bernard appear with a gun. He stated that she couldn't save anyone.
Because of the poison they can pump in?
You know about that.
Oh, I know about that.
The fact that the security system could kill everyone at any time had made Bernard lose hope. He had sacrificed so much and done so much, only to be a pawn in the hands of the AI. Juliet grabbed Bernard and said, "I might know how to turn off the safeguard system." Just as she finished speaking, the silo door began to close behind her. Juliet instinctively dove inside. Bernard tried to stop her, but it was too late. He quickly pulled her down. In the next second, flames erupted from the walls, ready to burn the two of them alive. Meanwhile, David finally entered the inheritance chamber, but the AI in front of him ordered him to leave. Only Camille was left behind. It seems she will become the next IT minister. The world has surprisingly returned to normal. This is actually a bit of content from the prequel. The time is set before the establishment of the bunker. A congressman walked into a club to meet his date. After passing a nuclear radiation safety inspection, their conversation touches on dirty bombs and an Iranian nuclear attack, which should be related to the apocalypse and the origins of the bunker. Before leaving, the congressman gives the girl a rubber duck toy. This is also a historical artifact that appeared in the first season. Could it be that the next season will trace back all the origins? The story of this season ends here. I didn't expect that the final episode would also not reveal the secrets of the silo and explain the background setting clearly. The entire second season can be summarized as the upper and lower levels engaging in infighting, Juliet desperately trying to return home. The cinematography and visuals remain at the first season's standard. The analysis of the entire micro-society is also spot on. The ensemble drama is portrayed exceptionally well. Even Bernard, as the villain, is quite charismatic, although there are suspicions of being sluggish. The last two episodes have a tight pacing in wrapping up the story. The counterattack from the lower levels was thrilling. Overall, it's still very much worth watching.